Right, well, there hasn't yet been an official confirmation, and I think a lot of the public don't imagine that there will be an official confirmation of who the shooters were. But what we know is that at 11 o'clock in the morning, this protest that you've mentioned began by Hezbollah or Hezbollah's supporters who were protesting against the investigating judge that's looking into the blast that killed over 200 people last year. They were protesting against him and calling for his removal, accusing him of political bias. Then at that time, at 11 o'clock this morning, as the protest began, shooting broke out. And what Hezbollah have said later this afternoon is that shooting was done by the Lebanese Forces. The Lebanese Forces have vehemently denied this. And as I say, we have no confirmation. But there was a speech by President Michel Aoun just a few hours ago, and he said, as you mentioned, he said that this violence, sectarian violence, cannot return to the streets, and he did say that they had spoken to the parties involved, which implies that they are aware of who the shooters were. But again, that's not something that's been officially released. I'm not sure that, I think, today, for many people, it can be considered a very traumatic day, which essentially what I've kept hearing on the street is, this is like the Civil War. This is a return to the Civil War. I think even though they haven't said who was shooting, who was behind it, it hasn't been officially declared that this was sectarian violence. But that's what people do believe it is, and essentially that in itself is problematic, because believing that sectarian violence took place, of course, can trigger more sectarian violence. And I think what people felt about today is that there's just no law on the streets of Beirut. They can see that there's multiple militias in the country, and that if they want to engage in gunfire, there's very little that can be done to stop them, because it lasted for 4 hours. Eventually, yes, the army did get the situation under control, but there were 4 hours of a shootout in a residential area. 6 people lost their lives, and multiple people were injured. So, and this all comes on top of the fact this was all about the investigation into the blast, for which there's been no accountability, for which people are completely uncertain whether there will be justice. And many people felt that this was a message from different groups saying that, this is what you face if you push for justice. So I think there's little calm for most people who are going to bed tonight in Beirut. We haven't heard from them yet, but we can only imagine that they're frustrated and aghast at what's happened, because, of course, they're looking for justice for their family members, and yet today there's been more bloodshed and more lives lost. While it was considered somewhat of a victory that this third attempt to have Judge Bitar removed from his position was denied, and that the investigation continues, it's also, you could say, a hollow victory on some level, because it implies that there potentially could be more, that there's constant hiccups, and that they say that they believe that the politicians that are calling the judge biased are just deliberately trying to obstruct the investigation. They're trying to push it further down the road to avoid themselves being investigated, and essentially to stop the investigation being successful. And I think, the protest, the shooting, all of this implies to people that that there isn't the ability here to carry out proper justice. Absolutely, exactly. Across the area where I'm stood right now, there's been about an hour of calm, I'd say, but before that we had almost more than 4 hours of shooting in this area, which perhaps you can see is a residential area, an area with businesses, an area with shops. Now, as I say, there has been about 40 minutes to an hour of calm in terms of there's no shooting, but the atmosphere, of course, is incredibly tense. There's a bit of smoke because there's been a fire lit. There's, of course, heavy army presence, as you can imagine, and people are just very nervous. Many citizens were evacuated by the civil defence during this shootout, and we're hearing that people are not going to be returning because they're just simply afraid. We understand that 6 people have died, 30 others have been injured, or more than 30 have been injured. So we'll be keeping an eye on those figures. But essentially, there's just a lot of fear here, and this is exactly what Lebanese citizens fear the most, an outbreak of sectarian violence right in the heart of Beirut.
ورق وهيك تيولع. لا يا خير في اسود عم يولع. عليكم ابو امير ابو امير ليه انا قلت عليها. هذه 10